1981!
Ever been bullied?
Yeah, smashing, super.
Then stay in tomorrow night, 9:05, BBC Two.
The secret is not to prick them.
We'll do anything for food on BBC Two.
Now on BBC Two, Kirsty Walk with Newsnight.
Shame on you!
If Huntingdon Life Sciences is forced out of business, our excellence in this field of science will be in jeopardy. Where will the animal rights protesters target next? Good evening. As we go on air, Huntingdon Life Sciences are desperately trying to clinch a last-minute deal to save the laboratory and 1,200 jobs. Today, Jack Straw moved to control the animal rights protesters, but if they succeed in scaring investors away, it could all be for nothing.
Do you think it's easy what those animals go through in there? You have a choice, Mr. Cass. You can walk.
Will scenes like this undermine crucial science which saves lives? Also tonight in Manila, hundreds of thousands of people are marching on the presidential palace to force President Estrada out of office for corruption. And while George Bush lives La Vida Loca on his way to Inauguration Day, and Bill Clinton heads for La Dolce Vita after a sleazy deal to avoid prosecution over Monica, Newsnight's been to the deep south to see if Bush's economic plans inspire much celebration. Midnight is the deadline for Britain's oldest drug testing firm to pay back more than £20 million to the Royal Bank of Scotland against a share price that has dropped from 121 pence to around 8 pence tonight. The managing director of Huntingdon Life Sciences told us moments ago that a rescue deal could still emerge tonight. But if the company closes, their work on dementia, asthma, AIDS, possibly leukemia, certainly diabetes, will cease or be transferred perhaps to labs outside the UK. Britain is, along with America, a centre of excellence for this field of research. Despite the government's tough stand today to curb the protest that beset HLS, how can they ensure the company stays in business? Here's Liz McKean.
Outside Huntingdon Life Sciences, the angry dogs of protest are a familiar sight. For 4 years, they've barked at the gates, baying for the closure of its animal laboratories.
It is a lie, because you abuse that every day in there.
As the campaign has gathered momentum, attention's turned from the main entrance to the people who pass through it. Staff are being ruthlessly targeted, not just at work, but at home. This man lives with his partner and her 2 young children. His name and address have been published on the internet.
When the phone goes or you get a package delivered, you're always thinking to yourself, my God, is it my turn this time? Has it finally got round to me? Because it's not a case of, is it going to happen to me? It's a case of when.
Huntingdon Life Sciences carries out research into medicine, agriculture and the environment. Its woes began in 1997 when an undercover documentary filmed lab workers abusing a dog. The share price, then a healthy 121 pence, plummeted. In 1998, new management took over, but the share price failed to recover. At the start of this week, it hit a new low of 1 3/4 pence after speculation that its main backer, the Royal Bank of Scotland, might pull out. The bank has found itself under siege. When it took over NatWest, it acquired a poisoned chalice, a £22 million loan to Huntingdon Life Sciences. This branch at Luton is among dozens to have been picketed. The protesters' aim has been to force HLS's financial backers to withdraw their support, driving the company out of business.
The logic of it is to try and bring the company to its knees in just another manner. It's financially weak. It brought that weakness upon itself by failing to comply to the regulations. Its employees were found guilty in court of cruelty. That resulted in a financial weakness, in a lack of confidence in the city and its customers, and that is really all we're reinforcing.
There's a feeling among staff here that never mind the pressure they're under, the work must and will go on. But they're going to continue to need a lot of support, both from the police and from politicians. The scientific community, both here and outside, believes a strong political will is needed to resist mounting opposition to this kind of research. The government is determined to show it has the will and the might. It's given extra money to Cambridgeshire Police, and it's planning new laws to clamp down on hate mail and the intimidation of people in their homes.
You have a choice, Mr. Cass. You can walk out of those gates and go home.
Today, the man in charge of HLS faced his persecutors. He has a campaign of his own to get new laws against secondary picketing outside financial institutions.
Secondary targeting has been a prime tactic in this campaign, particularly against our financial suppliers. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that financial institutions generally have not been supportive. They have actually given in to this terrorism and therefore, by definition, have actually encouraged it.
3 animal labs have already closed in the last year, and we're very concerned it would send a shockwave through the industry if more were forced to close.
So you think it's important they make a stand at Huntingdon?
It's very important for the government to make a stand now to prevent other people involved in medical research becoming the targets for intimidation.
The ring of steel around HLS helps keep some of that intimidation at bay. But while the government is promising greater protection to staff, the Home Secretary clearly expects the banks to stick up for themselves.
I hope that the directors of banks and financial institutions, who after all are not the cold face or the front end, sharp end of this kind of work, understand their own social responsibilities as well.
So no extra help then to those banks? They've pretty much got to sort the situation out themselves?
There are well-established laws for the conduct of demonstrations in public places, and they are inherently much easier to police, and also by definition banks are pretty secure establishments.
The future of Huntingdon Life Sciences now depends on its ability to secure lasting financial support. Other research facilities are watching anxiously. They know the hounds are scenting blood, and if they finish off HLS, they could be next.
Liz McKean. Well, in a moment I'll be speaking to Lord Hunt, the Health Minister responsible for the pharmaceutical industry and for medical research. But first I'm joined from Birmingham by Heather James from the group protesting at Huntingdon Life Sciences, and by Professor Trevor Jones, the Director General of the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry. Heather James, we hear that a last-minute deal may well be being negotiated tonight. What is your group's response to that going to be?
Well, we're ready for this, we've planned for this. We always said this would be a 3-year campaign. We're only 12 months into it. We have our strategy planned out, we know what we're doing, and we will close Huntingdon Life Sciences. It's as simple as that. If they get a last-minute rescue package, so be it. We carry on campaigning, we've got our heads down, we know what we're doing. I
see from your website I have in front of me that you show a detailed map of inside and saying if you do get in, this is where everything is. Is the intention to try and get in?
Sometimes on demonstrations people have got into the grounds of Huntingdon, and if anyone got into the buildings I would hope that animals would be rescued, because it is a torture camp, it's a concentration camp for animals, and time's running out. They kill 500 a day and something needs to be done about it.
Professor Jones, it's clear there are 12 months into a 3-year campaign. Even if there's a reprieve tonight, it's actually going to intensify.
Well, I'd like to hear from Heather whether she will condemn these acts of terrorism against families, phoning people in the middle of the night, phoning children. Will she condemn that? We do a legitimate piece of work in our industry to find new treatments for diseases, for children, for everybody. Will she condemn this violence?
Yes, I do, and I will condemn the terrorism that goes on inside Huntingdon Life Sciences.
So let's be quite clear, there's nobody in your group that writes... There's nobody in your group that writes to the list of shareholders, that phones them, that phones the internal numbers of workers at Huntingdon. There's nobody that you know or works with you does anything like that?
Not the people I work
You
closely
publish
with.
on your
Shack
website?
supporters do, and Huntingdon workers ring us up regularly, laughing at how many monkeys they've tortured that day. That's what we get on the telephones. We find that distressing.
But you see, it doesn't seem credible to me
They
that
do
we're
do
having
that.
this debate. The majority of people in this country accept the need for animal experiments in the cause of medical research. A very few, vociferous minority, have resorted to violence because they simply haven't been able to persuade the majority that they're right.
Heather James, let me ask you a question. If anyone in your family became epileptic, all drugs for epilepsy have been tested on animals, would either you or members of your family not take them? Would you not take them?
The drugs are there despite animal research, not because of it.
No,
Drugs
they are
have
there
killed
because of it.
people. Drugs have killed people because they've been tested on animals.
Whatever the
Yes, I
rights
would
are
take
wrong,
drugs.
you would take drugs that have been
Yes.
tested on animals?
Because they're there despite the animal testing. My grandfather had Alzheimer's disease, and I'm telling you now, you can cut up as many cat's brains as you like. It would not tell us why he got it or give us a treatment for it. My family has suffered with illnesses, and animal research is not going to help any human being. And there are doctors and scientists and professors who agree with me. If we want to talk about vivisection, get a doctor on.
Professor Jones,
against it.
well, let's talk about Professor Jones. Isn't the problem the pharmaceutical... You've caused the problem yourselves,
It's
haven't
not
you?
a credible
Because
position, is it? That animals are not going to tell us about the cause of disease.
They're not.
Or that we're looking to ensure that the medicines we research are going to be safe to
Set
apply
that aside for a minute. The problem
Well,
is
you can't
surely...
set it aside.
No, the problem is that you've
Central.
got competition in the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, if there wasn't this competition, the drive to get the best drug most quickly, there wouldn't be the need for the extent of animal testing that does go on. You could actually pool resources.
Not at all. We've got to find really better treatments for most of the conditions. The revolution in genetics and genomics that we're doing will allow us that. And the more we get, more companies doing more research, we'll find even better ways of treating conditions like, as you say, Alzheimer's, epilepsy and so on.
So why not distinguish? Why not come out and say, right now, OK, we're going to drive ahead with this, we're going to defend it, but we're not going to defend testing for washing powder, we're not going to defend testing for toothpaste. Let's finish that now, because
That's not
that
the
goes on
business
there
of the
too.
pharmaceutical industry. Our industry is there to do medical research, to find new treatments. We do it brilliantly well. With America, we lead the world in this field, and an essential component of that is to ensure that we are using animals properly and carefully under very strict rules, and that is what happens, and it happens at Huntingdon.
There are no strict rules.
There are
That's
extremely
rubbish.
strict rules.
They're not obeyed.
It's just not
The
so.
Animal Scientific Procedures Act is there to protect the vivisectors. It's not there to protect
Well,
the
I'm
animals.
sorry,
and
you're
you know
just
that.
wrong.
Home Office inspectors came into Huntingdon on camera, had a cup of tea and went, and they said there's nothing for us to see here, and they didn't look at one single animal. Huntingdon Life Sciences broke the law twice.
Well, you're just wrong, actually.
They
and
did.
I think that you
They
must,
reused a
you
group
do
of
a
cynomolgus
disservice.
monkeys, and they carried on with an experiment after the project licence had been
You
suspended.
do a total
You told the
disservice to
government and they
medical
did
research.
nothing. That's why people are angry.
Can we just ascertain from you, Heather James, how far are you prepared to go with this? The industry is worth second to the North Sea oil industry in Britain. It has very many thousands of jobs, 1,200 of which are Huntingdon. Do you want all these laboratories shut down?
Any laboratory that's involved in animal research, yes, do want it shut down because it's unscientific and it's torture for the animals.
And how
it
are
is
we
cruel
going
to
to
animals.
how are we going to find cures for the desperate conditions that still face many of us
There's
in
plenty
our
of
society?
research. We're not against medical research. We're
Well,
against
you appear
animals.
to be.
You, Dr.
You appear
Jones,
to
are
be
different
against
to a
medical
dog.
What about the point is that the animals come cheaply, and in fact, if there was the will to put more direction into computerised research,
Yeah.
then there'd be less need for the direct animal research.
We spend millions and millions of pounds every day finding alternatives.
If the banks won't back companies,
Yeah.
where are we now? Because are the banks simply being cowardly?
Well, this industry is a global industry, and it will continue to find a way of better treating conditions. We want it to do that in Britain as well as in America and elsewhere.
Heather James, briefly to you, one writer sympathetic to your cause said today that the more the government brings in legislation to stymie the protest, the more violent they're likely to get. Would that be your assessment?
There are people out there who are very frustrated and very angry, but the violence doesn't match what's going on inside the laboratories.
Thank you very much. Now I'll turn again to another studio in Birmingham where we're joined by Lord Philip Hunt. You have heard what Heather James said tonight. This is a 3-year campaign. They will be stepping it up.
Well, I was very concerned to hear that, and I can assure you that we will do everything we can to ensure that this company, which is doing its business legally, is allowed to do so without harassment and disruption.
The fact is, though, that this government has backed away from what Mr Cass wanted, which was legislation on secondary demonstrations, secondary picketing. Will that remain the case?
Well, what we've said, and the Home Secretary's made it absolutely clear, that we are looking now at the legislative possibilities to see how we can stop this disruption, this intimidation, this harassment. We'll come forward with proposals as soon as possible. But clearly, what we're doing is creating an environment in which people like Huntingdon Life Sciences can carry on their legitimate research potential.
There's no question of that happening unless you can persuade the banks to invest. Now, Citibank pulled out. The Royal Bank of Scotland, for whatever reason, is coming to the end of its loan. If you don't find investors for this, and indeed other companies who will be perhaps on the target list of this group, there will be no laboratories.
Well, certainly, I think the banks need a little bit of backbone in them, and we would encourage them to support these type of companies. Just let me make a point. R&D investment by the pharmaceutical companies in this country comprises 23% of all R&D investment. It's a huge earner for this country, so it's vital that they get support.
But it's interesting that we spoke to countless banks today. For a start, no one was prepared to talk about this issue, either on the record or off the record. The banks have got their own investors, they've got their own shareholders, some of whom are being targeted. You can't force the banks to invest in these companies.
No, but I think the banks will see that as a result of the actions that we're taking, the changes to the law that we'll propose, the support we're giving to Huntingdon Life Sciences, and the support more generally we give to the animal research and research-based industry in this country, that it is an industry in which they ought to invest. And I think also, coming out of this week's events, it's become clear that the public as a whole recognise...
You've got to win the public, because in fact...
Yes, we do.
And what you saw from the woman holding as it were, the middle-aged woman holding the placard, was not actually, animal experiments for diabetes. It was animal experiments for soap powder, for toothpaste. I mean, can't you as a government make a distinction here and at least perhaps drive a wedge between some of the protesters if that's your aim?
Well, we've already ruled out animal testing for cosmetics. And I think the great majority of British people recognise that due to animal research, we've made huge advances in medical science. New medicines, we need to continue to do that. I think the more the public are convinced, the more the climate will change.
Philip Hunt, is the government trying to broker a deal tonight?
We are giving every support we can. I understand talks are continuing. We are very hopeful that they will lead to a successful conclusion.
Thank you all very much indeed. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of Filipinos on the streets of Manila marching in the President's palace tonight, determined to see Joseph Estrada thrown out of office. The President got himself into this mess via a corruption scandal and has today been dramatically abandoned by the military, the police and his Vice President. He may be prepared finally to go, but like the Marcuses before him, he's a lot to take with him. He's asked for 5 days to pack. Here's our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban.
Tonight, the fate of the Philippines leader hangs in the balance. Popular protest has convinced everybody that President Estrada must go. Everybody, that is, except a few senators and the President himself, who proposed new elections in a few months' time.
Since I still have the support of a significant segment of our people, I do not think that the present polarization can be healed by a new leader who will take over without an electoral mandate from our people.
For months, street protest has been growing in Manila. This, after all, is the place that invented people power. The demos have sprung from the same place as the revolution 15 years ago that swept away the Marcos clan. The new movement has targeted Estrada for his corruption.
The dignity of the Filipino people is at stake here. We as a nation is at stake here. Not only our economy, but our soul as a Filipino people is at stake here.
The key blow against Estrada was struck 3 months ago when one of his associates revealed he'd paid a £5 million bribe to the head of state. That led to the impeachment proceedings. But as the legal process ground on, street protesters have grown impatient. Since Wednesday, the crowd has been building up, and in the last 24 hours, anything up to 500,000 people have thronged through Manila. And that prompted the death blow. The army deserted its commander-in-chief today.
We wish to announce that We are withdrawing support from the incumbent president.
Following that, even the police who guarantee the security of the presidential compound gave in to the Vice President's demand that Mr. Estrada had to stand down tonight.
I told him I'm very sorry, but I've talked to my officers and we have arrived at a unanimous decision or consensus to withdraw support from him.
President Estrada was left with so few allies that the only real options left open as the hours before the deadline expired were to seek some sort of amnesty from prosecution for corruption. That has been refused by the Vice President, who now stands at the head of the opposition.
Mark Urban. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head, in Manila. I asked him where the President was tonight.
Well, that's anybody's guess. We've heard of convoys leaving the presidential palace that may possibly have had the president inside, but he's been hanging tough. He's bargaining very hard over the terms under which he might leave the presidency. He wants to stay on. He's saying he wants another several days to stay on. And at the moment, I think he actually wants to keep going with the negotiations. So nobody is sure for the moment exactly where he's got to, or exactly when he might actually leave the palace and finally give up the reins of power.
So this idea of this 5 days he's trying to negotiate for could just be a ploy?
I think it is a bargaining ploy. I don't imagine President Estrada thinks he can really hang on to the presidency now. He has no cards left in his hands. He has no allies, but he has a lot of worries. This is a man with very serious allegations of corruption hanging over his head, and I think he will be talking hard with the opposition now about how vulnerable he is to possible charges possibly being brought before the courts or put in prison if he actually lets go of the presidency and hands it over, avoiding a prolonged crisis.
Now, I know you're well away from the palace at the moment, but have you any idea from what you've seen earlier, is the mood festive? Is it ugly?
It's an extraordinary mood, really, when you think of what this protest movement has achieved, the quite sudden overthrow of an elected government, and yet there's no menace on the streets, not even when the soldiers have come out, when the armed forces went over to the opposition. It's a very relaxed, it is a festive atmosphere. I mean, the whole protest movement has organised something that feels very like a festival.
Jonathan Head. Tomorrow, Bill Clinton hands the keys to the White House to the new tenant, a certain Mr. Bush. But not before the outgoing president pulled one last surprise. He struck a deal which will see him escape criminal charges for lying about the Lewinsky affair, if he admits that he knowingly misled in his testimony. Peter Marshall is in Washington. Typical of Bill Clinton, just to scrape away?
Oh yes, Kirsty, for good or ill, we're going to miss Bill Clinton. I mean, today's been like the last episode of the soap, of this series of the soap at least. Bill, the main protagonist, the president, he's confessed he's done wrong and been shown mercy by the prosecutor. Hillary, the First Lady, who was so put upon and hard done by, she's earned a spin-off series of her own, now she's in the Senate. And Linda Tripp, the great betrayer, she who had 2 facelifts, not 1 in the past 12 months, 2, which you may think is appropriate. She's been sacked from her job in the Pentagon today. But seriously though, Bill Clinton's going to stick around. He told the nation last night that he still wants to serve. He can't, of course, legally serve again as president, but he's been teasing friends that he still has one more campaign left in him. So the speculation, that's a run for the White House from Hillary in 2004, with Bill pulling the strings.
And of course, George Bush in prospect going tomorrow, dogged by Clinton every step of the way. But little excitement or great excitement on Capitol Hill?
Well, considerable excitement among the Republicans, at least. Once he's president, though, I mean, it's hard enough winning the election for George Bush, but once he's president, he has to actually do the job and has to persuade more than half the country who believed he's not really up to it. We've been down to the deep south to see what America expects from this next president.
From the marching bands in Greenville to the all-white churches of Jackson, from the embattled schools to the gamblers on the Great River, Mississippi is one of the 50 states that tomorrow become George Bush's inheritance. His presidency will be made or broken in places just like this. A year ago, Mississippi was bang in the middle of an electoral crisis. After failing to get 50% of the popular vote, the new state governor had to rely on his own party's Congress members to get into office. So Mississippi, like America, is a place divided. And we found it an ideal model to show what Americans want from their new president and what they fear about him. The Mississippi Trade Expo is an annual effort to drum up business.
Absolutely. We could look at refinancing anywhere from 8% to 8.75%.
In fact, the state that ranks at the bottom of America's economy league has enjoyed a pretty good year, planning for a future that's about to take shape in a field 20 miles outside Jackson. Kentucky has Toyota, South Carolina BMW, Alabama Honda and Mercedes. Now the Japanese car company Nissan is to build a manufacturing plant here. They'll be more than welcome.
This is important to Mississippi because of a couple of things. One is our own image of ourselves and what the image of the rest of the country and the rest of the world is of this state. The second thing is that the people that will be working here will be making almost twice what the normal average wage is in the state of Mississippi. And we've got 4,000 employees coming to be making twice the state average wage, and that's important to our state.
He delivered Daniel from the lion's den, Jonah from the belly of the whale, and the Hebrew children from the fiery furnace, and why not every man.
The abiding image of the US Deep South is still one of segregation. The civil rights victories of the 60s haven't healed all wounds. Even today in Mississippi, there's a debate about the state flag, which still includes Confederate symbols evoking slavery. Nissan have been assured it'll be ditched. In the main, though, they've been wooed by low taxes and eager state politicians, people who've put aside party differences.
Senator Lott, who is a Republican, Governor Musgrove, who is a Democrat. Both of them worked hand in glove on this project to make it come to fruition.
So you're saying that this is a model for the way America can work in the future?
It is a model that I think America should aspire to copy, I do.
Back in Jackson at the Trade Mart, they're all hoping this cooperative spirit will last, particularly now there's concern that even if America can avoid a recession, the boom years have come to an end. We canvassed the views of 3 of Mississippi's business and finance leaders.
I do think that the fast growth days are probably over for a while, and we'll have to learn to live with a slower growth.
So the Nissan investment's a really big deal.
It's a very big deal, not only because of Nissan itself and the $1 billion that they intend to spend on the plant and their 4,000 employees, but supplier plants will move in here to supply Nissan, probably creating another 20,000 or 25,000 jobs from that over the next couple of years.
Isn't this a bit of a slap in the face, though, for American industry? You've got to rely on the Japanese to come and have the factory here and show you what to do.
Well, I don't consider it a slap in the face. We defeated the Japanese in World War II, and they're bringing us some jobs, so I think it's just great.
That's it. A little more blue in there.
In Jackson's public schools, the literal description, they're American schools open to all, there's great interest in how George Bush is playing education as central to his agenda.
Many times persons in Washington don't understand what are the ills of education, whereas many of them have not been educators, especially when you look at the senators and the representatives, and they're making decisions about what we do in schools based on just data that they see, but they're not here during the job.
In a state which for too long neglected the schooling of the majority, the black and the poor, there's some satisfaction with the man who'll run the country's education system. Rod Page was educated in Jackson before making his name in Texas, impressing George Bush with a regime of standardized testing for which great success is claimed. In Mississippi, they say that's fine by them. How badly have American schools, Mississippi schools in particular, been failing them in the past?
Oh, we've been failing, no question. Mississippi schools have had much difficulty as it relates to current standards.
The road out of poverty passes by the schoolhouse, and education is just that important to us.
But isn't one of the problems now that a lot of white people are moving their children into private education which is stripping the public schools for where most of the black children are educated.
But you're also seeing a lot more blacks going to private school, but that's why we need to be more supportive of public school, public education.
This raises questions over the other leg of Bush's education policy, plans to give parents vouchers for private schools.
I am not in favor of removing public dollars to private and parochial schools. I've been in public education all my life. I believe in its worth. So I could not be in favor of that.
You think it weakens the system?
I know it weakens the system.
Out on the Mississippi and down on the Gulf Coast, they're trying to ease local economic problems with that old standby licensed gambling. Mississippi's casinos raise $200 million a year in tax revenue for the state.
So you roll the dice. All right. Okay, we got the point is 5. Every $5 you get $7.50. $10 you get 15, like a blackjack payoff on 5 and 9.
George Bush is still promising $1.3 trillion federal tax cuts. We found even Republicans in Mississippi fear that's a gamble.
I genuinely feel that he should look at what he is proposing very closely and that he should consider a slowdown of the size, certainly, of what he's been talking about.
Otherwise?
Well, otherwise, I think we stand a chance of overheating the economy again, and I think that we also don't get the benefit of reduced debt.
I got a kind-hearted woman, anything that's worth for me. I got a kind-hearted woman.
Heading north up Highway 61, past what once were cotton fields, you arrive in the Mississippi Delta. The people here have yet to achieve the American dream. We found them this week celebrating another dream, that of Martin Luther King.
If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star.
When it comes to black Americans, George Bush is facing a particularly tough haul. Few of them voted for him. Most of them resent and suspect the circumstances of his victory. What's more, the way he's been shaping up in preparations for office has only deepened their concern.
There are some programs that Bush is talking about cutting that we desperately need, those dealing with some of our younger children on the lower income bracket, and so we're in for a hard time.
He don't have the popular vote behind him. I'm looking at his cabinet. I'm not that pleased with his cabinet. I'm all right with Colin Powell. I feel like that's a good appointment. But I don't like the other appointments that he's made.
Why?
Basically, I think they're too far to the right.
The state's one black congressman takes an even stronger line.
Clarence Thomas is a black man on the Supreme Court. But if you look at his decisions, he might as well have a sheet over his head because most of his decisions are against the interests of African Americans. So if President Bush puts a black person in his cabinet, you have to look at the philosophy of that individual and not just the race of that person.
Well, the black people he's put in his cabinet, you're not referring to Colin Powell, are you? And are you?
He's one of them, sure.
For so many, then, it all comes down to the legitimacy or otherwise of the new president. But how do you explain to an African-American student, say, whose parents may well have felt disenfranchised or whose relatives in Florida may have felt disenfranchised by what happened, how do you explain to them the value of democracy?
Well, you know, that's such an interesting thought because you asked that question to an African American. And this is just one more of those pieces in our history that reeks of disenfranchisement. So, you know, it's like asking me, how did you ever do it? You learn to handle and then make a decision of where you want to live. And Mr. Bush is our president, and I'm happy that he is, because I'm an American.
Peter Marshall in Mississippi. Well, I'm joined now from Miami by Mike Murphy, who's a Republican political strategist, and from Washington by E.J. Dion of the Washington Post. Listen, we'll talk about Bill Clinton later, but first of all, Mike Murphy, you look there at Mississippi, a split state. It seems as if President Bush is only going to govern for half of the country.
Oh, I don't think that's accurate at all. What you're seeing is a little bit of the kind of aftertaste of a tough political campaign where there are a lot of partisans on both sides and the vote was split about 50-50. But it's not unusual in our history to have that sort of politics. You seldom ever see a president have total consensus, especially when you talk to the kind of politicized leaders of each side, some of which I heard in your report.
But beyond that, 90% of black Americans voted for Gore. That was more than who'd voted for Clinton. You heard people in Mississippi talking there about they don't like the makeup of the cabinet. They don't like even the fact, indeed, that, that Clarence Thomas is around, Colin Powell even is around. I mean, it's not necessarily satisfying what black America wants.
Well, since the Franklin Delano Roosevelt coalition, African Americans have voted overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party, and we're trying in the Republican Party to make an outreach to change all that. Now, I heard part of your report here in my ear, and I heard some irresponsible comments, I thought, from one real hardcore Democratic partisan about sheets and making Ku Klux Klan analogies, which I think is unfortunate and a radical view that doesn't really reflect the real opinion.
It was actually a congressman.
Yeah, well, I think an irresponsible congressman.
Well, E.J. Dionne, first of all, from your position, what does Bush do with this divided America?
Well, I think you're right that he has a problem, and I think that it's an odd situation in our country right now because in some ways we are sharply but not necessarily deeply divided, or at least we weren't before the Florida recount. It's not just a black-white split, it's a regional split. If you look at a map of the election, you had Al Gore doing very well in New England and the Northeast and most of the Midwest, and then all the way over on the West Coast. Most of the rest of the country is painted in Bush's color, so it's a regional split. There were also cultural divisions. The suburbs and larger cities tended to be more for Gore. The rural areas went much more strongly Republican this time than the last time. So I do think there are divisions in the country, and they were exacerbated by the fight over Florida.
Tell me...
I'm sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, how do you pick up on the criticisms over the cabinet and the signal of the appointment of an attorney general who's pro-life, who's going to have to deal with Roe versus Wade, an interior minister who feels that I think the environment's been given far too much credence? What signal does that send out?
Well, 2 points here. One is if you take the rest of the cabinet, it didn't raise those kinds of issues. And Colin Powell is broadly accepted as a figure in the black and the white communities. But you're right, those two appointments were very divisive. Bush faced two choices. He could deal with the fact that a lot of Democrats doubt that he really won the election, and he could have tried to conciliate them. There were other people he could have named for Attorney General who were broadly conservative and of his view, but would not have divided people the way John Ashcroft did. Or he could make the choice he made, which is to say, as some of his advisors have said, the way we get legitimacy is to claim it right away, act as if we won this election totally cleanly, and govern on Bush's agenda.
Well, Mike Murphy,
a lot of people might...
I just want to pick in Mike Murphy here because, in fact, you were McCain's man. I mean, do you think that, Bush should be inclusive, or should he set out his stall hard line from the beginning?
No, I think he's done an excellent job, and Senator McCain supports every cabinet decision he's made. I mean, the fact is, the conservative won the election, so you have a cabinet that has some conservatives in it. The only way for Bush to silence these critics from the far left and on the partisan side of the equation would be to appoint the Democrat National Committee officers to the cabinet, and we didn't win an election to appoint the liberal ideologues the other side of the cabinet. You have a fair, balanced cabinet, balanced in ethnicity, balanced in ideology, moderate Republicans, conservative Republicans, and it's a strong, very competent cabinet. That's the theme that ties it all together, from Ashcroft to Powell to Rumsfeld to just about anybody you can mention in this cabinet have proven experience in government, and I think that's what Bush was really looking for. Well, it's a good, balanced cabinet, and that's the art of politics.
Yeah, Dionne.
Good balanced cabinet from the point of view of a conservative Republican, and I think the issue is whether this decision to go with a strongly conservative cabinet and not say there were any problems with the election could be potentially a problem for Bush, because there were a lot of Democrats, I think, who were willing to accept the result even though they weren't happy with the way it was achieved. And I think some of these appointments have had the effect of organizing Democratic groups who might not have been instantly organized. The campaign against John Ashcroft has pulled in virtually all of the important Democratic groups.
Well, let's talk about what
I think it's a risk on Bush's part.
Before we go on to talk about Bill Clinton.
I think it's a large risk on Bush's part.
Before we go on to Bill Clinton, let me interrupt you and bring in 2 points. First of all, we want to talk a little bit about foreign affairs and then the economy. I mean, George Bush is backing the National Missile Defense System, hugely expensive. The Russians are tooling up again. I mean, why go for such an expensive program and promise tax cuts? Mike Murphy.
Well, the missile defense is in America's strategic interest. A study was done, several have been done, that proved that we're very, very vulnerable to attack by a low-tech terrorist nuclear weapon, and could be a very primitive missile. So it's a defensive piece of equipment. It's designed from a strategic point of view to protect us from rogue nations that may target the United States with a nuclear attack. I think many conservative elements of the political spectrum in Britain think that you all should back the same thing, because it's a defensive system that could only protect civilian population, which is a good national security goal.
E.J. Dionne, do you agree with that?
Well, a Republican foreign policy specialist I know said that missile defense is the most theological issue in American politics. As he put it, conservatives would be for it even if it were proven it couldn't work, and liberals would be against it even if it were proven it could work. I think you may see some differences of view within the Bush cabinet. Bush himself has been upfront all the way through in supporting this. I'm not sure that Colin Powell is as strongly in favor of the missile defense system as, say, Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, is. I think you could see a kind of compromise where they go for a space-based system that would take time to develop, and so they make the choice for missile defense but kind of put off some of the hard decisions.
Well,
and I think that's one possibility.
Before we leave you, we must turn to Bill Clinton with one giant leap. He was free of all criminal charges. Mike Murphy, was this to be expected?
I think so. I don't think you would have seen a prosecution, but I think the problem with it is here's Clinton, a man of great political talent, who used all that talent in a defensive manner to protect himself from stupid scandals. So the historical legacy he leaves is one of not a lot of accomplishment, but a lot of great talent, even genius, some would argue, wasted in the defense of such stupid blunders. And here we are on the last day of their administration, where I see David Kendall, his lawyer, yet again on television, explaining another lie. I think ultimately it's tragic.
How will you remember him?
How will I remember him? As a man of tremendously wasted potential. A great political communicator, alas, of the wrong party, who had great gifts and used them for almost nothing of purpose.
Well, E.J. Dionne, do you think he's going to dog President Bush because Jesse Jackson has been effectively neutered, as it were? You know, there's no sign of Al Gore. Is it still going to be Clinton after Bush? To go after Bush? I don't mean for the White House.
I don't think... You know, Clinton said he'll be with us till the last dog dies, and I see a lot of dogs around, so I think he's going to be with us for a long time. I don't think he's going to speak out immediately, because our etiquette is not for an ex-president to immediately sort of come out and attack the new president. But yes, I think he's going to be a leading spokesman. And to Mike's point, I half agree with Mike. There was clearly a lot of talent wasted in Clinton's own defense because of these scandals. On the other hand, I'm not sure we know yet whether history is going to look at him primarily in terms of these scandals, or whether it's going to look at him as an important transitional figure who...
We'll have to wait and see, I'm afraid.
But our country is better off.
We're running out of time. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, that's the view from the States, but what about this side of the pond? We've commissioned two columnists here to give their slightly different views of Bill Clinton, the man and the politician. In a moment, Peter Hitchens of the Mail on Sunday, but first, Michael White of The Guardian.
What is it about Bill Clinton which made so many of his opponents so bitter and twisted during his presidency? Some of his friends, too, the ones who voted for Ralph Nader and thus helped elect George W. Bush. I hope they enjoy the next 4 years. My own theory is that Clinton rattled the American right in the same way that Ronald Reagan offended so many Democrats. They shared an easy charm, a knack of making Americans feel better about themselves and America. It allowed both to get away with other things they shouldn't have. That and their wives, Nancy and Hillary, both in their different ways over-influential. Clinton's crime then was to play Reagan with brains and to retire with a 65% poll rating, despite the sex scandals and the financial scandals, the latter largely untrue, despite years of investigation. Of course, Clinton was too much a tactician, too little a strategist. He had huge talents, but failed to reform the US healthcare system, one of the most costly and unjust in the world, or do enough to close the poverty gap. Haiti, Somalia, botched interventions, Russia neglected, China indulged. I know. But the shameful indecision over Bosnia and Kosovo were really Europe's shame, not his. And Clinton presided over the greatest economic boom of modern US history. The right gives him no credit for that, but governments can and do mess up economies. He intervened financially to rescue Mexico and Japan and boost free trade. Black America got its share of that. Clinton could talk across the race divide like no other president. in years to come, when that botched impeachment will look the shabby plot it was, we'll miss him, and George W. will find it all harder than it looks.
Ludicrously, they called him the man from Hope and pretended he grew up in the Arkansas boondocks. Hope had nothing to do with it. His real childhood was spent among the gamblers and good-time girls of a zoot-suit town called Hot Springs, where he was so poor that he had to drive to high school in his own Buick. Everything else about him was a fraud. The recession he claimed to cure was ending before he took office. His economic policies were forced on him by others. His takeover of the Middle East peace talks ended amid gunfire and may make the warlike Ariel Sharon Prime Minister of Israel. His meddling in Ulster ensured the victory of terror over law. As for the women, William Clinton's miserable dishonesty in power shows that private morals and public ones are linked after all. He was a cheat, a liar and an oaf in private and in public. To those who still know what the meaning of is after 8 years of squalor, he will be best remembered for his advice to Juanita Broderick, who claims that he raped her. She, like us, ended up disillusioned and bruised. He told her, "You better put some ice on that."
Two views. Well, in a moment, to look at tomorrow morning's papers, but first, a roundup of today's news stories. Our main story tonight, Huntingdon Life Sciences are still trying to secure a rescue deal ahead of a midnight deadline to pay back more than £20 million to the Royal Bank of Scotland. The Health Minister, Lord Hunt, told this programme British banks need to show more backbone and back British science. The couple at the centre of the transatlantic adoption row after buying American twins on the internet are tonight planning a High Court battle to keep the baby girls in the UK. After the twins were taken into care late last night, Alan and Judith Kilshaw held a press conference today where they insisted they'd done nothing wrong and said they'd do everything humanely possible to get the babies back. A hearing has been set in the High Court in Birmingham for Tuesday. Lord Prentice of Daventry, Reg Prentice, who served as a minister in both the Labour and Conservative governments, has died at the age of 77. As the MP for Newnham North East, he dramatically abandoned Labour for the Tories after a series of bitter rows with left-wingers. And the markets, the FT 100 share index was down, while in New York the Dow Jones also closed down. Against the pound, the euro was unchanged. Against the dollar, sterling was also unchanged. Tomorrow morning's papers. Now, the Daily Mail runs with a story that Judith Kilshaw, one of the couple trying to have the babies in this country, said, "My internet mother wanted to rent my womb," claims her daughter. We've tried to contact the Kilshaws tonight to verify the story, but haven't been able to. But apparently she wanted her own daughter by her first marriage to carry a child by her second husband, Alan. A different story in The Sun, the Kilshaws' secret baby. Apparently, Mrs. Kilshaw helped a friend father, or I should say give sperm to a friend of hers to obtain a child. We can't verify that either. Daily Express, do the internet twins really deserve this? Pictures of Mrs. Kilshaw apparently up drinking and chain smoking late into the night. Well, that's all for Newsnight tonight, but if you want more, there's news coverage round the clock on BBC News 24. Jeremy Paxman will be back with more on Monday. Until then, from all of us in the programme, have a very good weekend, and we'll leave you with some of the highs and lows of the Clinton presidency.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Hello there. Well, it looks as though there's going to be some snow in Washington for Inauguration Day as things turn colder across northeastern parts of the US. Here, it's going to be turning milder, but we're going to get some snowfall as well through the weekend. In fact, a little bit of snow overnight tonight. But once again, that rather nasty mixture, if you're travelling, of fog, ice and snow just about anywhere across the UK. So a little bit of care and caution on the roads. Another widespread frost tonight, a few snow flurries, particularly for North Sea coast. A little bit of snow further inland and perhaps a few sleety showers across the Channel Islands and the far southwest of England. Tomorrow, well, it's going to be another cold day, very similar sort of feel to the last few days, really. Again, the chance of some snow flurries, particularly down the eastern side of Scotland, eastern England, perhaps a little bit of snow inland as well. And then there's that mist and fog. Some of it may linger all day in one or two places. But the cloud thickening up down to the southwest, and that really telling us that the change is starting to get going, that change to milder air that I mentioned earlier. Now, we'll be keeping a very close eye on that, because Saturday night into Sunday we'll find rain turning to sleet and snow for a time, and it looks as though if there is going to be any disruption due to this snowfall, it'll be from the North Midlands northwards, but as ever we'll keep you updated. The reason, well, it's this weather system here coming in off the Atlantic that'll eventually bring that milder weather with it, but it is going to bring a lot of cloud, and it's also going to bring us rain, sleet and snow. Probably find any sleet and snow in the south turning to rain, but it's further north, as I said, that we'll get more in the way of snowfall and strongish winds as well, so that make for some pretty poor visibilities. The worst of the disruption, well, as you can see there, northeast England up into Scotland, but even so, there could be a fair amount of snow across the Midlands and into North Wales, East Anglia too. So that's how it's looking early on Sunday as this wintry mix moves in from the west, taking its time to move up to the northeast, but nevertheless, that snowfall probably causing us some problems. That's the weekend forecast.
In a democratic election, every vote counts. Again, and again, and again.
For the sake of our unity, I offer my concession.
You're looking at the next president of the United States.
The inauguration of George W. Bush as U.S. President in a BBC News special, live coverage Saturday on BBC 2 and BBC News 24.
Late Night Friday on BBC 2 with Buffy, Robot Wars and Trevor Nelson's Urban Choice on the way after Room 101.
Supposing you had the chance to get rid of some of your worst nightmares, what would they be? My guest is here tonight to persuade me to banish the items on his list to Room 101. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Rich Hall.
Thank you. Oh, what a lovely... How are you, Paul? What a treat to be here.
You're an American, I believe.